reviews, and today I'm back. Sorry about my absence last week. I just fell terribly ill. Fortunately, it wasn't COVID. Fortunately, I managed to stay out of the hospital. And fortunately, I'm about 90% back to healthy. So I do need to lay a little bit of groundwork before I discuss the movie that is on the docket for today. I love found footage horror movies. If you watch my channel, you know that that's not really too much of a surprise. There's a lot of bad ones out there, though. And about 2 years ago, February 22nd, 2021, I reached my breaking point with the bad ones. And I made a video, 9 Laws of Found Footage Horror for Filmmakers. And it was basically just kind of discussing a lot of the foibles and the issues that I found within a lot of the more common awful found footage movies. A lot of the mistakes that they made that really just came down to not respecting the format or respecting the perspective. Well, I made that video. It was great to get it out. It was received fairly well. It did okay. Kind of on the low end of my channel's average, but I was still happy to get it out there. And then something kind of interesting happened. I want to say, when was this? Yeah, about a year after it was released, it started picking up. That's kind of unusual. Usually my videos will kind of follow the average and just stay there, but this one started making an upward trend. And I also started hearing from folks in a way that was really humbling. Some comments left on the video and a lot of emails and private DMs and so forth from filmmakers, or at least, student filmmakers, folks that were actually watching the video on an academic level and using it as a template for which they made their found footage horror projects. And I was honored. I'm still honored. I'm still flabbergasted. I think that that's a fantastic thing. And it's certainly nothing that I actually expected to happen when I made the video. It was more just me venting than anything else in a bit of a structured format. So that's generally, that's some of the groundwork laid here. About a couple weeks ago, I got contacted by a producer / assistant director for this film, Maniacal Night, which is currently set to enter some festivals and kind of make that circuit before I would imagine inevitably finding some distribution or going straight to VOD platforms. And they were asking me if I would evaluate this movie. I get these requests all the time, and unfortunately, there's just too many requests that I can tackle. The calendar only goes so far, and I would love to fill all of these, but I have to kind of cherry pick nowadays. But I mean, something about it seemed a little intriguing to me. And I was also told that the film's director of Shariko Bakari was a fan of the channel and took much advice of that video in the creation of Maniacal Night. And so that definitely piqued my interest. I was like, well, how well does my video actually affect the outcome of a film? It was an interesting question to me. So, I said, okay, well, December's all Christmas horror movies, so I'll see what I can do to get after that and, the 2023. And they're like, well, it actually is a Christmas horror movie. I'm like, well, okay. So here we go. So yeah, Maniacal Night 2022, written and directed and starring Shariko Bakari. This is a film that follows principally 2 characters of Kim and Novak, played by Cicely Jackson and Shariko Bakari, as a couple that are going out on the road and they're trying to get away for a private Christmas cabin holiday.
Hey Kim fam, y'all already know what day it is. It is Christmas Eve. And as you know, Novak and I are doing it a little bit differently this year. We won't be with any family, with any friends, any of those annoying ass kids.
So this is all under the radar. This is their little secret to spend Christmas privately together. Nobody else knows where they're going, which is always a great layup to a horror film. So that's basically kind of how the movie starts. And probably about the first third to a half of it is the road trip getting to the cabin, and then getting to the cabin and having their own little private Christmas. And then a home invasion movie starts happening from there. So I'm going to be keeping this, it's going to be a little bit more in depth because this is going to be kind of a full video evaluation as requested of me. but I am going to avoid spoilers in terms of where characters wind up by the end. But I will be kind of getting into it more than just quick synopsis of the general vibe. So if I had to kind of come up with a big overview statement about this film, it would be a decent setup, but it winds up promising more than it can deliver. And that kind of just gets embedded throughout the entirety of the film. That is the film's theme, is promising more than can be delivered. And I'll get into that in a little bit as far as like some of the deeper aspects of it. There were definitely some aspects of this movie that I really, really enjoyed. And I want to highlight those because they're important and they're also tricky. So this movie starts out with a bit of a scrolling dialogue voiceover, John Larroquette at the beginning of TCM, which in my mind is not necessarily, like the best way to go.
What you're about to see is nothing short of macabre and disturbing.
It's describing, these events, are the most horrific attack in American history, so on and so forth. And, so now we have the promise, and there's no way a movie like can really deliver. Then we get introduced to the characters and they're on the road trip. And that is the aspect of this movie that worked the absolute most for me, is the interaction and the chemistry and the relationship between Kim and Novak was so fantastic.
Yo,
You know why I'm not excited?
please tell me why.
Because from this point, we probably have at least an hour and a half to 2 hours.
Oh my God. Y'all, we're almost at ATL.
ATL, ho.
Yeah.
ATL, ho.
Everybody has their own kind of breaking points and annoyance points and so forth. And I could see the main characters getting on some folks' nerves. For me, it just worked. It worked so well. The relationship felt natural and fluid. The dialogue just seamless and played off each other and riffed off each other really well. There just seemed to be a chemistry that felt like it went beyond the screen, beyond the camera, which is a terribly difficult thing to pull off. I don't know how well Shariko Bakari and Cicely Jackson know each other off screen. I don't know if they had a prior relationship, platonic, romantic. I don't know. If this was a situation where it was simply meeting for the first time for the sake of this production and answering casting calls, hats off to them for actually having this level of chemistry and this level of dynamic interaction and dialogue. Oftentimes when I get asked to review a movie, especially from a small filmmaker that's just, wanting to put their project out into the world and wanting to get some constructive, honest criticism, that is the aspect that falls down the most. They could have an interesting concept, an interesting story, some, nice little aesthetics and so forth, but their primary characters interacting with one another is by far the area that falls down the most, the area in which a small filmmaker will trip on their own shoelaces the most. And Shariko Bakari nails it in this. So the entirety of the road trip getting to the cabin was a solid movie to me. Not necessarily a great horror movie, not really anything scary happened, but a solid movie and a solid layup. If I had any criticism of it, it would be probably went on a bit too long, probably could have gotten to the cabin a little sooner, but maybe not, as I'll get into in just a moment. So they get to the cabin, they're having their little Christmas thing there, and again, the interactions just kind of continue, which is solid to me. It's not a whole lot more than just kind of, some playful riffing, but I was intrigued, I was engaged, so yeah, mission accomplished as far as that goes. And then they see somebody outside the window. And I think this was the first big failure point for me was, and this kind of comes down to the found footage, 9 laws and so forth, is respecting the perspective format. So they see somebody outside the window, standing, down below. And I kind of am phrasing that generally and vaguely because we don't get to see that. There's interior lighting glare on the glass back door.
No, but look, the person standing right underneath the light post.
So we have to take them at their word, which in my mind was one of the first points of failure. We needed to see that. If they're going to be having a found footage home invasion movie, we need to be kind of getting that cat and mouse layup. And then the movie just kind of abandons any idea of any kind of cat and mouse and just has the villain pressed up against the back door, and they get in, and that's it. The two leads are now tied up in chairs and are ready to be tortured, and the camera passes to the villains, which at that point, I think to me is just a series of failures compounding on top of one another. Let's get into them kind of chronologically. First of all, this is a home invasion movie, which typically does have an aspect of cat and mouse to it. An aspect of them battening down the hatches and trying to prevent people from getting in, and all the ways that there can be kind of shocking or jump scare kind of moments that happen from there. The villains getting in straight away and dominating the characters and dominating the scene and tying them up kind of just took all the air out of the sails. So the idea of having any kind of a terrorizing, haunting cat and mouse kind of thing was completely out the window. And at that point, the camera shifting to the villains with them holding the camera on the two leads, in my mind, was a failure of the found footage perspective and respecting the perspective format. Because one of the great things about found footage and why it works so effectively when it does is because we are in the shoes of the protagonist. We are in the shoes of the characters. The terror is happening to them, but we have just as much information as they do in the perspective. So we're going through it with them in a way that other movies just can't. It is a level of visceral engagement with the audience that other movies have to make up for in other ways. But with found footage, it's just inherent. It's part and parcel of the perspective, and it works so well. So handshaking the camera off to the villains it was really jarring as far as that goes. And now it kind of took that element away. So any terror that was possible was gone. And at that point, we kind of wind up with a little bit of a different movie. If they're already caught by halfway through the movie, is this going to be funny games? Is this going to be, something else? And in that is some of the next compounding failures chronologically. The most glaring of which, and I think probably the biggest one of this movie, I really do my best not to be cruel, which is probably a really, really weird way to phrase this. I really do my best not to be cruel, but I also try to balance that with being honest. And I also really don't like hyperbole. I truly believe in my heart of hearts that one of the best ways to destroy your argument is to overstate it. So if everything is the best of blah and everything is the worst of blah, then, where's the nuance in that? Where's, the gray area of your perspective over the course of hundreds of videos? Or hundreds of reviews. I try to stay away from hyperbole. So just bear that in mind with this next statement. I try not to be cruel. I also try to be honest, and I don't like hyperbole. Maniacal Night has quite possibly the worst villains I've ever seen put to screen. And I feel bad making that statement, but it is just honest. Nothing about it worked. Nothing about the villains in this film worked at all. Their speech patterns, their dialogue, riffing off of one another, riffing off the main characters of Kim and Novak. Nothing about it worked.
Please.
What would you do to save her life?
Okay, I'm sorry.
That's the best you've got?
I love her, yes.
Oh, okay.
I love her.
All right, well,
Give
what do you
him
think?
5 seconds.
Give him 5 seconds? Okay. Yeah, 5 seconds, and you have to convince me why I should let her live.
It shrieked of two people that were just really kind of pumped about what they were doing, but had no idea what they were doing or why. And there is an aspect of home invasion movies, The Strangers comes to mind definitely, of having no reason for things and simply just acting because you were home as the reason that they're there. Things like that. But they knew information about Kim and Novak. They knew about another character that they met up with earlier in the movie. They had inside information. So it wasn't a random break-in that is now just kind of going into torture. It's something more direct than that. But at the same time, the way that they're talking and the way that they're laying out tools on the table to intimidate about torture, incoming, it just felt completely directionless. Getting back to that theme of promising more than they can deliver, That happened constantly with the dialogue that was happening from the villains. We're going to do this to you, this to you, this to you, this to you. And they like lose their train of thought constantly. They get bogged down in arguments with one another and then forget what they were doing. And then back to the drawing board. Okay, well, you're going to be so scared of us because we're going to do this, this, and this. And then they don't. They'll cut somebody and there won't actually be a cut wound. There'll be bare, clean skin with a cut t-shirt, a wound of the t-shirt over top of uncut skin with blood, blood pack kind of stuff going on around it. The fact that there wasn't actual wounds happening was a failure on 2 points. One, that's not something that really is budgetary constrained. That's something that can be accomplished with saran wrap, some cornstarch, some clay. There's a million different ways to do that for pennies on the dollar, and there's a million YouTube tutorials on how to make those kind of special effects wounds happen. So in my mind, there was absolutely no excuse for not having them. But the other thing that it did was kind of highlight where the budget restrictions would be in the plot itself, which is a little bit to the film's detriment. What do I mean by that? I don't really look down on a movie for being low budget. I love low budget movies. I've seen some fantastic productions that have done so much with very, very little. But when we have something like that, and then we have the villain lording over the character and say, I'm going to cut your leg off and you're going to be walking around on a stump. I'm sitting there thinking, no, you're not. That's not going to be happening. Not in this movie. You couldn't even make a cut happen. So all these things that they're threatening them with, showing them their spleen, it's like, no, you're not. You're just not. You could have had a cut and you didn't have a cut. So what are the chances are you're going to be doing this? But beyond just promising more than they can deliver and making, these threats of I'm going to do this, this, and this, just the speech patterns and the presence that the villains didn't have and the ill-fitting masks that they're constantly having to adjust until they finally get sick of it and take them off. All of it just kind of lends itself to not really having anybody of any real credible threat. Yeah, I mean, the characters are tied up and they're being tortured and so on, but the terror is taken out of it. We don't have those characters' perspectives anymore. The camera has shifted to these incompetent, blundering, arguing, mask adjusting villains that don't know what they're doing or why. And that was, I think, kind of the primary aspect of the movie that didn't work for me, but it also spoke to generally, not necessarily as a found footage movie, not even necessarily as a home invasion movie, but just a horror movie in general. I didn't know what this movie was trying to say. I didn't know what it was trying to accomplish. I don't know what the intent was. If it was trying to be scary, I think it kind of missed a lot of opportunities to do so. And it could have used the found footage perspective to accomplish a lot of that, especially knowing that it will be home invasion down the line. It could have had those opportunities like in the beginning, in the portions of it that worked for me, but were just kind of, laying up the characters. They pulled over at a rest stop, go to the bathroom. It could have easily had a moment where, characters, talking to the camera, turning around. Audience now has information that the character doesn't, primarily what's behind them. And it could have had somebody in kind of a bright jumper or sweater, something kind of unique, something that would stand out to the eye, but not necessarily, somebody that would draw attention to themselves, just something to kind of click and make the audience notice them. And that could have been something that happened later on as well. We had a scene just before they get to the cabin where they're meeting up with Novak's sister-in-law, Kim's sister, at a food court in a mall. And Kim's off doing whatever, and Novak is talking to her and talking to the sister-in-law and revealing that he is planning on this trip to pop the question. He's showing her the ring. And the camera is in the sister-in-law's hand. So we're seeing Novak talking to the camera and talking about his, plans and so forth and showing the thing. We could have had that same guy in that same bright jumper. Again, not really somebody that would, not like somebody in a big, Disney goofy, cosplay outfit, but just somebody wearing a bright sweater that kind of stands out and clicks in the audience's mind. So we could have had a repeat occurrence with that. And we did have one moment in this that worked especially well. I think it was probably the only scary scene in the movie, and I don't know if it was purposeful or accidental, but it was a good example of how this format can work. Is that same scene where Novak is, pulling out the ring and talking to his sister-in-law. All of a sudden, at some point, he's in the middle of a sentence and then just drops dead. His face, just terror. And he's looking at something over here. You can't see what. His footage is over here, perspective is over here, and he is just terrorized by something off camera. And that was really good. And I'm not going to really, get into spoilers on what it was. Just, it was a little bit of a fake out and fun moment, but I did enjoy that. So there were some opportunities that it could have capitalized on to lend itself to the home invasion thing down the road. But more than that, what the movie really needed was a voice. It needed something to say. It needed to relay a story. And that was really what was missing from this. We had characters that were well established. We had dialogue that was well done. We had a good foundational setup. But then we failed to have any real story. We had a home invasion thing happen. Camera shifted over to the villains, promising more than they could deliver. Some scenes of faux torture. There was more dialogue than actual torture. And that seemed like it was it. So I really couldn't understand what Maniacal Night was trying to say, was trying to have in any kind of plot, story, subtext, anything along those lines. So it wound up in a place of kind of accomplishing the opposite of what it wanted. With the villains, I felt like laughing at them more than being terrified by them. And with the storyline of the movie itself, I felt like I wanted to just take a nap more than anything else. But that's not how I want to leave this video. That's not how I want to end this. So how I want to end this is by talking directly here really quickly to Shariko Bakari, because I'm, again, honored that, according to the email, fan of the channel, enjoyed the video, found footage, 9 Laws video that I made, and is looking for feedback. And the best feedback that I can give is keep going. You got something. There's some talent here. You've cracked the code on an aspect that so many other filmmakers I've reviewed have not. And that is character dynamics. A lot of the other aspects need practice, need refinement, need focus. But please keep going. Please keep making movies. I'm dead serious. I'm very much looking forward to seeing what you put out next. I know this video is not what you wanted to hear, but that's something that I say to everybody that comes to me is I don't promise a good review, just an honest one. And that's what I try to do here. I try not to be cruel, but I do try to be honest. So I am very much looking forward to seeing Shariko Bakari, your next movie. So thank you for reaching out to me. I do appreciate the opportunity and I appreciate your support. And I appreciate all of you out there that have watched this video. If you liked it, please click like and subscribe. And remember, next time you want to watch a horror movie, first make sure that it's good and rotted.